Allism Spectrum Disorders by Terra Vance, unapologetically Aspie, from 2018. And this is the best parody that I've seen in description of Allism, describing the way that autistic people view non-autistic. In prevailing literature, people on the spectrum have all of their traits, behaviors, and even their very existence pathologized, and they're considered to have mind blindness, or the empathy, or the opposite of empathy, which means they're unable to predict the feelings or thoughts of others. I would say that I knew the feelings of thoughts in others, but I didn't realize that they knew that I knew their thoughts or feelings, or I didn't realize that they knew my thoughts and feelings. I think before I go on, I will say that autistic people and Aspies need to acknowledge our own mistakes and failings, that at times we've ignored the feelings of others for one reason or another. But onto the article of Allism. Is a pervasive developmental disorder which impairs a person's social, communicative, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral function. Marked difficulties with social relationships frequently imagines nonverbal cues are meant to indicate offense. I've certainly had this happen to me a number of times, particularly with the college-age folks, when they would see me working, moving something heavy, just doing my job. They would perceive it as some kind of a threat to their safety, when in fact it had absolutely nothing to do with them. These persons tend to suffer from lack of empathy, and they assume that the independent actions, facial expressions, voice inflections, and factual statements of others are intended to be hostile, argumentative, or condescending. For example, when the East Pittsburgh police assumed that my facial expressions and voice inflections and even factual statements of denying that I was on drugs was somehow meant to be hostile or argumentative or a lie. They may suffer from delusions of persecution and believe that others are judging them or attacking them, when in fact it has nothing to do with them. Difficulty understanding the motives of others, believe the thoughts and opinions of people are related to their own participation and existence in the world, when that may not be the case. Allistics have difficulty believing that other people can perform actions independent of having a motive that is in some way related to them. Conversely, they often become offended when they perceive that others have done something independently without factoring into their endeavors how it relates to the allistic him or herself. Pervasive difficulty discussing topics of substance deflects discussions of theology or whatnot in favor of discussing a TV program, for example. I experienced that in Bible study. Allistic people tend to make judgments, form preferences, and imitate the most prevalent rhetoric and talking points of current issues. Their political, social, religious, and cultural identity is based on the social structure of those in his or her immediate circle. They would prefer to continue espousing, there's the word spouse in there, and parodying mainstream beliefs which are dominant in their social circles, and would become hostile and combative toward factual evidence about these views. And they superimpose imagined meaning, subtext, or connotation on factual statements, may even perceive compliments as insults, or believe they can divine true context from the tone of others, even in the form of written text. Yes, I've certainly had that happen to me, particularly from a female allistic person. Related to the tendency to feel persecuted, allistics project meaning onto factual statements, believing that there is some implied or passive subtext in concrete factual statements. Often feel this statement of fact is a veiled attempt to assert supremacy or dominance. And I can't help but think of white supremacy or the patriarchy here that Christian feminists have a problem with. Will lie or misrepresent themselves and their needs in order to appear aligned with others, will agree with the opinions of others so as to avoid the discomfort of being contradicted. I think autistics can certainly do this too. It's just part of passing. Allistics demonstrate debilitating fear of nonconformity. Certainly we autistics can feel this fear as well, and have difficulty disagreeing with the opinions, preferences, and musings of others. Is content to assume the identity of those in the dominant social structure, potentially as a result of the aversion to examining or studying topics beyond their most basic tenets. Chronically summarized and prefer to be inaccurate than to be contradictory. Feels the need to suppress desires and differences out of fear of discrimination. Conversely, may discriminate against others on the basis of ability, level, gender, race, sexual orientation, religious, socioeconomic status, while fully aware of these biases, will not admit to holding discriminatory beliefs or feelings of superiority. Again, I think autistic people can fall into this problem as well. May treat others as inferior and in need of control if those people belong to some arbitrary or superficial minority category. Assigns a value and rank to people based on the prevalence of their superficial traits, such as how tall they are or how loud they talk, their tone of voice, will feel justified mistreating people who practice a different religion. And this doesn't even have to be a religion, but just someone who thinks in a way that's differently than them, or just is thinking about something different than what they're thinking about, or who demonstrate a different configuration of traits, less frequently expressed in his or her immediate environment, devolves to tribalism. I'm not prejudiced, but the foreigners in my community are all looking to take our jobs. An omnipresent desire to have needs met by others persists into adulthood, expecting those around them to abandon their pursuits, to spend time sitting in proximity to each other without engaging in productive discussion or interest. These needs extend to the abstract, insisting that others understand and intuit the allistic person's emotions and confirm verbally that they have understood those emotions, like, what did I say? Or, did you hear what I said? Frequently requiring others to apologize for imagined slights because of the feelings their delusions produce. Further, allistics feel driven to have their actions and feelings validated by others in form of praise. Yes, like a bad mother who wants to be complimented after throwing a fit of rage at her child or someone else. Overinflated, superstitious view of personal abilities. Believe self to be able to discern the character, beliefs, thoughts, and intention of a person by looking into their eyes or listening to their tone of voice. Allistic believe themselves to be able to divine, as if by metaphysical prowess, the internal thoughts, states, and motives about another person due to the subtleties which can in some spiritual way be divined by looking to their eyes or listening to their tone. This trait often causes the allistic to feel warmth and trust for other allistics who've learned to manipulate others by exploiting this pathology. Allistics can be naive and vulnerable due to perceived kindness they see in the eyes of people who seek to take advantage of this trait. Allistics tend to feel that those who do not reciprocate their strange gestures and intense staring are dangerous or untrustworthy. This is a reflection of a phenomenon known as mind blindness. And one of these strange gestures is the underhanded thrusting of the palm out toward another person, as if that's evidence of, see, I told you this person was like weird or bad, and here's the proof. Or, they'll kind of like move their head and their face forward in disbelief at you, like, as if that's evidence that they're right. May demand collaborative work, but be unable to cooperate, difficulty working alone. And this is clearly shown by the fact that when an allistic person wants to engage cooperatively with someone who's autistic, what they mean by cooperating is when the allistic person does 90% of the talking, and the autistic person only does about 10% in response, and the allistic person gets to set all of these rules for what the autistic person is allowed to say, not allowed to say, when to say it, how they have to say it, but the allistic person, him or herself, doesn't follow any sort of rules about how they're supposed to act. Allistics are socially motivated and need to work collaboratively in order to focus. They require frequent breaks, profuse praise for mediocre performance, and verbal or written validation of the quality of their performance. May be unable to work without frequent rewards and acknowledgement of their performance. They're motivated more by the rewards they receive than by the importance of their contribution to the greater good. A byproduct of tribalism, they may have difficulty respecting leadership and co-workers who are less attractive, of a different race, ethnicity, religion, or disabled, or have some other observable difference. Naive and gullible, easily persuaded by groupthink, confirmation bias, advertisements, and emotional appeal. Because allistics have an identity rooted in their position or rank in an arbitrary social structure, they're easily persuaded to purchase items or become involved in ritualistic or meaningless trends. Operating without a stable sense of identity, they're constantly searching for ways to belong to a tribe. Instead of being able to feel secure in an individual identity defined by their special interests and how those interests contribute to the betterment of society, they need to adopt an identity which conveys their desires to belong to a certain tribe. They willingly invest in clothing and superfluous accessories with the names or trademarks of others whom they perceive as being of a higher social rank. This trend may have been born of archaic and bruised practices of burying the brand to the height of livestock in order to establish ownership of animals. In fact, an enduring allistic favorite brand logo depicts a male riding a horse, presumably a patriarchal vestige of this former custom. Allistics are also susceptible to the capitalistic schemes of multi-level marketing companies, which, despite decades of established unethical commercial trade practices of causing more than 99% of investors to lose money tend to thrive on the naivety of holistics. Because holistics have difficulty with refusing requests due to fear of being perceived as impolite, and because they are socially motivated to be seen as liked and supportive of their pack, they invest hundreds of dollars into purchasing essential oils made from the same weeds they pull from their flower gardens, or from subpar overpriced leggings manufactured in sweatshops featuring childish cartoonish designs. The holistic invades personal space, begins meaningless discussions with strangers without reading social cues that the person is disinterested in the conversation, asks meaningless questions to which they do not want to know the answer. I think the autistic may do this from time to time as well. Holistics, due to their mind blindness and lack of empathy, ask questions of others without interest in an honest response. These hollow questions are ritualistic and not representative of productive conversation, which is very strange due to the holistics' typical desire for profit, capitalism, and productivity. They may disrupt the intellectual and artistic pursuits of others by coercing them into conversations when they are not consenting participants, unable to read the glaringly obvious facial cues that the person wishes to remain uninterrupted. This meaningless and rote inquest is not to be confused with echolatic speech, a mechanism which does serve a communicative and neurological purpose with verbal and auditory processing. Now, consider how it feels to see positives about yourself pathologized as negative and inconvenient. And consider how insulting, myopic, inaccurate, and one-sided this portrait of you is. And then consider that you will never know what it's like to be in this medical and neurological minority where you've read about your entire existence and identity characterized as oafish, graceless, and delayed. This parody is written to inspire you to think about the damage caused by the bulk of literature written about people on the spectrum that empowers people to espouse these dangerous beliefs. Because you have the privilege of being the majority, we need you to help us to change the conversation about autism spectrum disorders. Now, I will say, I don't think it's true that you will never know what it's like to be in this medical neurological minority. I think perhaps some of you already have experienced this, or you may in the future.